have some fat clients, you're going to have some skinny clients, you're going to have some in-between clients. Everyone's going to have a different perspective around sugar. And the idea at the end of the day is that sugar is a fuel source. You have to bullshit straight for 1 minute. You ready? We're going to do the 60-second bullshit challenge starting in 3, 2, 1, go.
Here's one of the most important things to know about sugar. It's actually one of the worst substances that's ever been created by man. The problem is that it's actually super addictive. So you have a little bit of sugar, and then your body actually demands that you have like 30 to 40 times the amount that you originally had. Think about that. You have one Oreo, and before you know it, you need to eat 40 Oreos. There's not even 40 Oreos that come in one package. And when they've done research, when you have the electrodes connected to your head, the electrodes fire off worse, but like in the same fashion than if somebody who's on Coke. So you think about that, it's like, oh my God, people get these sugar highs. They're running through brick walls. They crave it like Coke. So now they're going to go and steal money in order to get more Oreos, because there's not even 40 Oreos that come in that package. And you need to have all 40 Oreos in order to satisfy the craving that has now been created by that. But worse yet is people are trying to create this whole world of, I'm going to have diet sodas or things that are sugar free with sugar kind of alternatives. And those actually trigger a response, which is roughly 57 times greater. So now you go back to the original Oreo, and now you need to have 57 Oreos to satisfy that craving, just because you had fake sugar, which is ultimately rotting out your body like a class 1 carcinogen. So it's actually worse than alcohol and smoking cigarettes as well, if you really like think about it and tie the things together. And that's what people just aren't connecting these days, is sugar is like the devil. But if you consume sugar from somewhere in the range of like 12-17 in the morning until about 1:30, that is actually a great time to have sugar, because it doesn't actually break your fast, especially when you're on a keto diet.
So now that we've had that wonderful exposition and introduction around what people usually say as it relates to sugar on today's episode of Beyond the Pump, we're going to dispel some of that BS that you've heard about sugar and give you the basic nuts and bolts of what non-pseudoscience says, and ultimately, should you be wary of sugar or not. And you're going to want to you're going to want to hang out until the end, where we actually give you the bottom line. But bottom line up front, it depends. So with all that to say, clearly there are a lot of outrageous claims and stakes, exactly what we just heard Stephen share. And we've understood that. That was pretty compelling. And if you didn't know anything, chances are good you might have been intrigued, and you might have.
Hold on. I guarantee you that I can find on social media a couple of those. Like the sugar and Coke thing, I think is actually a real correlation that exists. And the demand on having multiples out of 40 and 57, I don't know, is probably another. I can find those before this episode is done. Guarantee it.
Well, I mean, there's also the correlation of people that consume more sugar, right, are actually more prone to earmuffs, anal. Hear me out. Alcohol is a sugar. People that consume alcohol are more likely to engage in things that are considered taboo. Ergo, sugar, not alcohol. I can't read it. Back it up a little bit.
Research on rats has found that sugar is more addictive than opioid drugs such as cocaine. See? Told you. I read the fucking white papers, bro.
Is that a white paper or is that a Gemini?
Mic drop.
That looked like a Gemini result.
No, I Yahoo'd that thing, bro.
You Yahoo uses Yahoo! Oh my god! That's not even a good search engine! Oh. All right, check it out. Listen.
That's what we're up against. Dude.
All right, listen, here it is. Normally we ask you to share at the end. We need you to share this episode, because the idea and the knowledge now that this stuff is circulating, it blows my mind. Here's what you need to know about sugar. Why is this important for coaches? And that You're going to hear clients say some crazy shit. You're going to have some fat clients. You're going to have some skinny clients. You're going to have some in-between clients. Everyone's going to have a different perspective around sugar. And the idea at the end of the day is that sugar is a fuel source, right? The same way that you have different types of gasoline. You have premium, you have unleaded, and what's the one in the middle? Mid-grade?
Mid-grade. Yeah.
I don't think anyone ever gets that. Like, let's be honest. Everyone either gets premium or unleaded. No one's getting the middle one.
You know, the middle one is literally just the other two mixed together.
Probably.
No, it literally is.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Which actually, by mixing different types of sugar, you can actually increase your performance. But there's a couple of different perspectives that we want to tackle sugar from. One is health. And this is the thing that people often conflate or mix with performance, in that some people say sugar's bad, sugar's good. Well, oftentimes it's how you're using it. You wouldn't put gasoline in a regular gas engine, right? You would use the right type of fuel source for the vehicle that you're driving. And that largely depends upon what work you're doing. If you're dealing with a large work truck that needs to tow thousands of pounds, you're probably going to want a diesel engine, right? If you're not, and you're just driving a little EV smart vehicle, you don't even need gas. You can just subsist off leaves and dew, which is how vegetarians live. Gross. I'm kidding. I love you plant-based people. You're just my favorite people to make fun of. Trust me, meat eaters also get butthole cancer, and they actually get it in greater prevalence. But anyways, long story short, the fuel depends upon the demand. So if you're an athlete and you're working out 5+ times a week, a little bit of sugar for dessert is not going to kill you, right? And in fact, it actually might be helpful because that's going to give you more fuel. And depending on what kind of sugar it is going to allow you to replenish the fuel that you're using faster, right? And it might burn cleaner, which means that it just may have less inflammatory responses. So from a health perspective, the thing you want to keep in mind is what type of sugar you're consuming. So there are complex carbohydrates and there are simple carbohydrates, right? Simple starches, complex starches. And basically, the more complex it is, the longer it takes to digest. The longer it takes to digest.
Wait.
The longer it takes getting your bloodstream. Let me finish that thought.
Are you suggesting that sugar is a carbohydrate?
Sugar is a carb, yes.
Wait, hold on. They're interchangeable?
No, not necessarily. Carbohydrates and sugars, more or less, like when you can kind of categorize everything, it all breaks down into blood glucose. Right. So when we say sugar, we're using that interchangeably for the most part as the thing that you're consuming that's going to get converted into what we call blood glucose or circulating blood sugar. Right. So when people say my blood sugar is low and they get sluggish and they get, a little bit lightheaded, things like that, people that go hypoglycemic and they start sweating and actually having a medical condition, that's low blood sugar. So what do? They pop like a tablet or something, usually 15 to 30 grams. And they sit there for a second to allow that to digest and circulate in their bloodstream.
That's 100 calories in a tablet, right? It's like that is going to make everybody fat.
Note the silence, audience. Note the silence, chat. I'm getting into Twitch streaming recently. It's funny because you're supposed to talk to the people that are coming into your stream as if they're there, and you just collectively refer to everybody as chat. You're like, hey, chat. It's the weirdest thing. It's a weird habit now, actually. I'm getting weirder as I get older. But yeah, so when I say sugar, understand that I'm using sugar and carbohydrates interchangeably in this case because they ultimately get broken down into blood glucose. Now, the way that happens depends on what type of carbohydrate relevant to the fuel source earlier. But the way that the majority of your metabolism functions is that you take these circulating blood sugar molecules or these glucose things and you convert that into energy, right? So your body has to maintain itself like a thermostat and be very good with keeping the right amount circulating. That right amount gets kind of funky, which is where now, depending upon what your circulating blood sugar looks like, will trigger sometimes an appetite response, right? When your blood sugar gets high, that will tell you, or one of the ways that you can actually determine satiety, or are you full, or have you had enough to eat? There's a lot of things that go into appetite, and that's not what we're talking about today. But long story short, carbohydrates break down into glucose. Glucose circulates to give your body energy. That's it, right? That's the universal, what we know to be true today based upon the research. Now, you take a pixie stick and you give it to a 5-year-old, what happens, Steve? I've never had a 5-year-old, so you would. That's just conjecture, but
they they get very energized.
How long does it last?
Not very long.
Not very long. What happens on the back end?
Oh, that big ass crash, and they're just cranky.
Cranky? Ugh. You know, it's funny. I would always think that if you fed a kid Pixie Stick, they had the crash, they would pass out. But what I'm hearing is that they don't pass out. They just get really cranky.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
that sucks.
Yeah, they don't sleep.
God.
They don't sleep on the other side of that.
You said they won't?
They don't, no.
Oh, that sucks. All right. Well, don't do that with your kids if you ever want them to just pipe down a little bit, unless you put, a little bit of whiskey in there. But my mouth is covered. So if you ever hear this, I'm going to deny that I said that. My point being,
remove that from the
edit that out. Funny. No, but long story short, so it kind of, we have similar reactions. It's just not as pronounced as we get older because we get better at somewhat regulating that. Now, people that are more fit have a significantly better ability to regulate that blood sugar, right? People that are more sedentary, they tend to have a little more trouble actually keeping that specific level situated, right? There are things that control how much circulating glucose you have. Traditionally, we know that insulin or insulin resistance, right, which is a prerequisite for being considered diabetic. Basically, whenever you consume like a meal, let's just talk about glucose physiology for a second. Like you consume a meal, it breaks down into blood sugar, glucose, right? It's circulating in your bloodstream. And obviously, as you're eating it, you're getting more of this stuff to circulate. And as more of it enters your bloodstream, your body needs to figure out what to do with it because remember, it's like a thermostat. If the temperature in your house gets too hot, it puts the AC on. If it gets too cold, it puts the heat on. Well, your body is always doing that stuff to keep you alive because you don't want a blood sugar level that's 240 and and up, because that's where you kind of go blind and maybe have a stroke or some kind of weird like neuropathy or like some kind of bad health implication happens, right? And if you do it repetitively, right? If it happens once or twice because you have Cheesecake Factory on your birthday, like you're fine, chill. But insulin is what causes that stuff to get circulated or stored out of your bloodstream into your liver or your muscles preferentially, right? Those are the two main storage silos. And whatever it can't store there then gets usually turned into or stored in your body fat, right? So that's where if you're consuming more food and you're having more glucose circulating than you need and you have small muscles, right? This is where now it's going to have to go somewhere else, which is traditionally how fat cells grow and all that other stuff, right? That's the general fat gain physiology for those of you that aren't aware of how that works. Now, you have something if that's what happens when it gets stored, obviously, if you don't eat for a couple hours, you're no longer having enough circulating glucose. So you have to go into your storage to pull it out. And that's something that's called glucagon, which is an access hormone, and it causes it to break down and basically, be taken out of storage form, which is called glycogen, and put back into circulation. Now, your muscles can store 300 to 600 grams of glycogen for most people, right? Your liver can store 85 to 110 grams. Your liver is the thing that causes the amount circulating in your bloodstream to actually regulate that thermostat, right? But as I'm moving my hands, as Steve's nodding his head, as we're talking, all this stuff requires energy in the local tissues that are completing the action. So as I'm moving my fingers, I want some stored glycogen in there so that way they can be used in that specific intramuscular area, right? If I'm doing a lot of bicep curls, right, this is kind of when you think about workouts, you'll fatigue, but then the fatigue goes away because you're constantly having to generate more energy. But anyways, long story short, so you eat food, gets broken down to glucose, free fatty acids, amino acids. Those are more or less the three things that happen. They get absorbed as they're going from your stomach into your small intestine, into your bloodstream, or into, it gets processed through your liver, goes where it needs to go and does what it needs to do. So the idea is we need to have not too much, not too little, but just the right amount, which is why macronutrients and calories matter, because it helps keep some of those things in check. So I love the idea that when we take glucose and we put it into perspective, it largely comes down to the overall amount of calories that you're consuming is the thing that's implicated in the research as a health concern. If you're over consuming calories and the majority of those calories are coming from things that are simple sugars, meaning they cause your blood sugar to go up quickly, like what we mentioned earlier, that pixie stick analogy with the kid, that's a simple sugar. Quick blood sugar spike means quick dip. And on the back end of that, that means your blood sugar is doing this all day, which is where people then tend to be a little bit hungrier and they tend to have a higher proclivity to overeat because when they're hungry, I don't know about you, but I definitely tend to eat a little more than I would if I were like,
Whenever you
kind
can
of
shove
peckish.
in.
Yeah, exactly. And so people, and this is kind of when we start looking at healthy behaviors around food, and I say healthy, we look at feeding frequency. How often are you eating? People that are intermittently fasting, when you cover time restricted feeding, you decrease their eating window or their feeding window to like 4 hours. If you ate as much as you could in 4 hours, like your stomach is literally going to get too full to add any more food into it. So that's what it makes it a little bit great of an appetite regulation tool because you just can't overconsume as easily as if you just like had a pizza in the morning, a pizza at lunch, and a pizza at dinner. Like you have more time for that stomach distension, or basically how big your stomach gets when it fills with food. That is one of the mechanical triggers for satiety outside of your hormones and your circulating blood sugar. So this is why when you're thinking about managing your blood sugar, you want to think about it. You want to eat regularly, you want to eat frequently. And sometimes if you're trying to lose weight, you don't even have to necessarily go out and like cut out some sugar stuff. Maybe if you eat a head of broccoli, which is pretty big, right? Or you drink some water, which is a pretty good dieting strategy for people to feel full, is that it's going to fill your stomach up a little bit. And then you add the food to it and it's going to make you feel a little more satisfied mechanically. Although your blood sugar might not necessarily stabilize because maybe you didn't have enough calories. So I see
So,
your
question here. So, I had helped a company build out a program for trainers, and I remember wanting to include information around meal timing into the idea and like some of the outcomes, or I don't want to say pros and cons, but just the idea that meal timing is something that if somebody is attempting to, I don't want to say extreme, like, hey, I'm really focused hard on weight loss, or hey, I'm trying to hard athletic performance, or something like that. Not just normal, I'm just kind of moving on around my house type mentality.
Mm-hmm.
On a scale of like 1 to 10, when it comes to, you know, blood sugars, insulin, things along those lines, but also my ability to perform and or lose weight. Again, I'm going focused here. I'm really trying to achieve this outcome. How important is meal timing and frequency? Like, how much influence can that have on your success?
I mean, it's not the foundation of the pyramid if you kind of look at it from that perspective.
Not the
You know,
foundation, but
no.
is it the least important thing of all the things you can do?
I mean, it influences a lot because exactly what we just. So it depends really on the individual, and I hate to say that because it is so nuanced. But like, consider this: if I told you, Steve, you need to eat 2,000 calories to have your performance outcomes, whatever it is,
Sure.
right? And I didn't mention the feeding stuff, and you consumed all 2,000 calories in a single sitting, would that be the most effective for your performance? Probably not, right? So then do you need it twice a day? Do you need to have two 1,000 calorie meals? Do you need to have seven 300 calorie meals? Like there's so many different things that go into that. I will say that the things we know for performance specific people, so from a health perspective, it doesn't matter, right? Eat whatever. Now, there are certain things that you will get if you distribute your feeding frequency because we want to maximize something called muscle protein synthesis, and that's beyond the scope of this conversation. But basically, you have a muscle building response whenever you consume proteins in excess of like 25 to 30 grams, right? It caps out at about 50 grams, meaning if you eat more than 50 grams, it may not necessarily have as big or pronounced or even any muscle building effect. So if you eat 150 grams of protein in a single sitting, you just had one big dose and now you've lost out on like you basically kind of wasted 100 grams of that protein consumption. Whereas if you'd spread that out 3 meals, which the general guidelines like at least 4 meals a day, if you want to maximize muscle building, effects of food and protein specifically. Now, sometimes what we know in research is that a controlled setting like a research lab or following people around and preparing their meals, like that stuff is not the most applicable in the real world scenario. So it's like good, better, best. If you can make sure that you're consuming enough calories, if you can do that, cool. Then you want to probably tackle your macronutrients. Like what does that look like? Are you consuming enough protein, fiber? I even lump water in there, which is something that you need in excess of one, I don't know, actually, I wonder how much that weighs. So you need 1 ounce per pound of body weight, or half of that, excuse me. And so 1 gallon is roughly 4 pounds. So yeah, you're going to need at least 1 kilo of water per day, 2.2 pounds. So long story short, calories, macros. And then from there, if you want to control your weight, control your calories. If you want to control your body composition, control your macronutrients. If you want to control your mood status and your overall sense of well-being and your quality of life, then you want to look at your micronutrients. Doing those things in that order is probably going to be the best control for health and longevity. For performance, now you start stacking on timing, you start stacking on supplementation, you start stacking on different types of behaviors, wherein even like the macros and the calories and the micros, like that's still kind of advanced for most people that don't even eat regularly. So when you say like, hey, I want this performance outcome, I say, let's look at these specific measurable things. If you were a healthy consumer, I would say, hey, let's look at your behaviors. What happens? How are you eating? What does that frequency look like? What does your plate look like? And we would make it a lot more easy and simple, I should say, not easy, because there is a challenge to being consistent with that. But starting with building your plate, let's have a third of it be vegetables, right? Because we know that those are implicated heavily in having enough micronutrients and feeling good. Let's have a third of it be starches, right? So that way you have enough energy from a carbohydrate perspective. And let's have a third of that be protein, and let's have some dietary fats, throughout that. And sometimes when you have a third of your plate being protein, there's usually inherent fat source in that. So that's usually what I like to start people out with. I literally have them take an 8 to 12-inch plate, draw it into thirds, and then try to just eat that. PN, Precision Nutrition, they pulled this from the Diabetic Association, but basically they were like starting to use their hands as measuring tools, and that's one way you can take a plate and make it more specific, right? But we're always looking at big picture, little picture, big picture, little picture, like what's the easiest thing for people to achieve. And that's where I say, at the end of the day, having the appropriate amount of blood sugar circulating is going to leave you feeling good, feeling like you have enough energy and not feeling like you're crashing all the time. Although I will say that everyone's like freaking out about a 2 p.m. thing. Like you shouldn't no, it's natural. It's just part of your circadian entrainment. You should have a lull in the afternoon, right? But should you be completely exhausted and reach for another cup of caffeine? No. But we'll talk about caffeine metabolism in a different episode. So that's blood sugar from a short perspective, because now we have to
So lay terms here real quick. Let me repeat back what I just heard.
Yeah.
And some of my inferences that maybe I didn't hear. Sugar in the granulated white form that we use for cooking, baking, whatever, is super easy to overconsume because it's just very refined. It comes in and very quickly it can throw you way over your calorie balance per se. At the end of the day, one serving of sugar or rice or oatmeal or any other grain is effectively, calorically speaking, the exact same. Blood wise, how quickly it hits your system, it spikes your sugar up, and then insulin and all these things. Obviously, there's some differences there. Simple sugars, carbs, faster, complex, slower, less, etc. So those things matter there. But when we're thinking about sugar in the general idea of, hey, I want to lose weight and tone up, it by itself in its form, under the assumption that we're having the same amount of grams of carbohydrates as oatmeal or something else, isn't going to cause you to get fat by itself. Overeating the calories, too much sugar is, overeating anything, generally speaking, is. But it's not necessarily about what it is. It's about having too much of it is what I'm gathering from this. Secondary level, there's some blood implications, storage, things like that we might think about for somebody who that starts to matter for, kind of going down that road from a performance standpoint or whatever the case might be.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much what I would suggest for the general consumer. If you're a coach, you want to be able to understand those principles so that way you can deviate and manipulate the program a little bit. Which is why it behooves you to understand the why. And this being a coaching podcast, like if you don't know what that looks like, we have a nutrition certification that's launching here in actually like 2 weeks. So where we talk about that stuff, and we actually show you how that works. we're trying to figure out if we're going to add a blood sugar monitoring tool into the actual thing. But obviously, it's a little cost prohibitive. There's a great thing called NutriSense if you want to know what your blood sugar is doing and how what you're consuming is affecting it. It's a little needle patch that you can put in the back of your arm, and it
That
lasts about
needle's
2
like
weeks.
giant.
It's pretty big.
It's
But there's a couple, it is actually pretty big. I'm not a big fan of it. I can actually like eat, and depending on where you put it, because if you're fit and like you have less body fat on your arms, you might just feel that needle during certain kind of muscular contractions, which has been my experience of it. Every time I was doing any kind of tricep, elbow extension, like I would feel it kind of scrape. Maybe I
I
didn't
put it
taste
in.
it
I couldn't even move my arm for 3 weeks. I'm just like, nope.
because he should have taken it out after 2, and I got a little septic.
2 weeks, that too. Whatever.
Okay.
After I said it, I'm like, wait, was it 14 days or 21
Yeah,
days? I don't
it's
remember.
14 days. Yeah, and then like it takes some time, but basically the way it works is like it measures how much circulating glucose you have in your interstitial fluid, not directly in your bloodstream. Anyways, but long story short, like if you want to know how food affects you, we can give you the general idea of how that works, but there are different monitoring tools that matter that can allow you to get more specific. And that matters when the margins matter. If you're just trying to feel better and there's no real worry about disease and you don't really care about any specific performance events, then use your how do I feel kind of scale. Do I feel better? Do I feel worse? Did I eat that? I felt better. Okay, maybe I continue to do that. I ate that. I felt worse. Okay, well, maybe don't do that. Right. But to leave you guys with one thing is that, and maybe we'll talk about protein, we'll definitely talk about protein this month, but you can actually overconsume protein, and actually even females, I think, is actually something they're finding right now, is that when you consume more protein as a female, it doesn't have as much of a negative body composition effect as consuming a fuel substrate like a carbohydrate or a fat. Right. So, interestingly enough, and this is my personal experience, and there is not as much research to support this, but if you crave a lot of sugar, chances are you might be stressed, and then that kind of messes with your appetite a little bit. So, grab a protein snack. And I know it's not a sweet treat, so chill, but grab a protein snack and see if that helps regulate a little bit of that appetite. Maybe you have a couple bites less of the ice cream after. Those couple bites stack up across 6 months. So, those are just some tips and tricks that we talk about in our Join Beyond coaching side of the house, that we're always looking to help people that don't know how to navigate that or want some specific fixes with that. So all that to say,
I'm just going to say Ninja Creamy, 1 cup of some nice high protein milk
yeah,
with some protein powder in there.
yep,
That is a delicious sweet treat that is nice and protein packed without, like, I think it's like 3 grams of carbs all in. So
there you go. I've never
don't knock the ice cream. I'm just saying.
no,
And I'm not a
nope.
sweets guy, but some protein ice cream is really good.
Do they have steak flavored? Ooh, that'd be nasty. No, thank you.
No,
Actually, I probably would. I don't have a
I'm
sweet tooth.
gonna, you know what? Actually, I would probably try it, and here's the reason why. I actually had a beer, probably 10, 15 years ago at this point, that was made with beef in it. So it was a steak beer.
That's fucking disgusting.
So
I tried to get a friend of mine who was a chemist to help us formulate some protein beer. And she was like, what's the binding agent? And like, it never went anywhere. And then I think that protein beer kind of recently came out. It was only like 6 grams, but still, like if you're crushing 4 of those, which most people do, then
yeah, 24 grams. You're good.
you hit your muscle protein synthesis. But
All right. Well,
yeah, that's it for today.
thanks for listening to Beyond the Pump, the coaches podcast where we break down the business of fitness and nutrition. Here was your dump on sugar and carbohydrates, and the reality is they're not that bad for you. But
Yeah. That's what
everybody
happens when
thinks they
Steve
are.
says go off script. You get
Everybody
a fucking
thinks they are. So it's eating too much. That's bad. But otherwise, most important thing you can do for us is subscribe to the channel and throw a comment down there on what you would like to learn more about, what you want us to bring to you, so we know what to bring you, and it's things that you're interested in. Otherwise, gang, thank you. Have a good day.
subscribe.